A cocky fake Bruce Lee is terrorizing an Arizona town's martial arts schools, systematically destroying every dojo while live streaming his victories to thousands of followers. The arrogant imposter has already broken a female karate instructor's wrist and is now targeting elderly seniors in their peaceful Tai Chi class. But when the bully shoves a 78-year-old war veteran to the ground, he doesn't notice the quiet janitor watching from the hallway. This is Steven Seagal himself. The fake martial artist has no idea he just crossed a line in front of a man who's spent decades perfecting the deadliest fighting system on Earth. While the injured veteran writhes in pain and the terrified seniors back away, the legendary aikido master steps forward with that signature deadly calm. The punk keeps filming, thinking he's about to humiliate another victim, but he's actually recording the moment he challenged one of the most dangerous men alive. The corporate conspiracy behind this scheme is about to meet the one force they never calculated, a true warrior who's been hiding in plain sight, protecting his community. What happens when a fake tough guy faces the real Steven Seagal? Will the bully survive learning the difference between movie fighting and authentic martial arts mastery? What happened next would terrorize the imposter for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sleek black Camaro purred into the Sedona Community Center parking lot like a predator surveying fresh territory. Tuesday morning's desert sun glinted off its polished surface as the engine fell silent, leaving only the gentle sounds of seniors finishing their Tai Chi practice in the main gymnasium. Tommy Chin stepped out with practiced fluidity, his lean frame draped in traditional Chinese martial arts clothing that seemed almost theatrical against the Arizona backdrop. Every movement was calculated for maximum visual impact. The way he closed the car door, adjusted his silk jacket, even how he walked carried an exaggerated grace meant to suggest deadly skill. Inside the community center, Meredith Palmer looked up from her desk as the striking figure approached. At 45, she'd seen plenty of characters come through these doors, but something about this man's confident swagger made her pause in her paperwork. "Good morning," Tommy said, his voice carrying just enough accent to sound exotic. "I'm Bruce Lee Jr., and I'm here to honor my father's legacy." Meredith's eyes widened. The resemblance was uncanny. The lean build, the fluid movements, even the way he held his head. Tommy produced a leather folder containing impressive credentials from what appeared to be a prestigious Hong Kong martial arts academy, complete with official seals and photographs. "I'd like to use your gymnasium this afternoon for a demonstration," he continued, flashing a charismatic smile. "Free of charge, of course. This desert town deserves to experience authentic kung fu." As Meredith examined the documents, Tommy's phone was already positioned discreetly, live streaming to his growing social media following. His voice dropped to a stage whisper for his audience. "Time to bring real martial arts to these pretenders." "This looks wonderful," Meredith said, genuinely impressed. "We'd be honored to host you." By 3 o'clock, word had spread through the small community. The gymnasium filled with curious locals as Tommy performed an impressive but flashy demonstration. High kicks, spinning techniques, and fluid forms that drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. His commentary flowed between philosophical quotes and subtle criticisms of inferior American fighting styles. In the back doorway, arms crossed and expression skeptical, stood Janet Morrison. She'd run Morrison's Karate Academy for 15 years and knew authentic martial arts when she saw it. This performance, impressive as it might appear to civilians, felt hollow to her trained eye. Their gazes met across the gymnasium. Tommy's lips curved in a predatory smile as he addressed his livestream audience. "Looks like we have our first challenger." The worn keys felt heavy in Janet Morrison's weathered hands as she unlocked Morrison's Karate Academy Wednesday morning. 15 years of teaching had left their mark on both the modest storefront dojo and its owner. The mats were clean but showed countless hours of dedicated training, and Janet's movements carried the precision of someone who devoted her life to perfecting her craft. But she'd built this school from nothing, teaching practical self-defense and traditional Shotokan karate to local kids who needed structure and adults seeking confidence. Every cracked mirror and faded poster told a story of struggle and perseverance in a community that couldn't always afford martial arts lessons. Meanwhile, across town, Tommy was systematically executing his plan. Wednesday afternoon found him at Rodriguez Taekwondo, where he defeated instructor Miguel Rodriguez in front of his shocked black belt class. The live-streamed footage showed Tommy's unorthodox footwork confusing the traditional martial artist, while his commentary mocked predictable American techniques. Thursday brought him to Brennan's boxing gym, where he outmaneuvered Rick Brennan, nephew to retired police Captain Dale Brennan, using circular movements that frustrated the young boxer's linear attacks. Each victory was immediately uploaded, with professional editing and strategic hashtags that sent his follower count climbing. Dale Brennan watched the videos with growing unease. 35 years of police work had given him an instinct for trouble, and something about this Bruce Lee Jr. didn't sit right. The man's techniques were impressive, but his cruelty toward defeated opponents and obvious pleasure in humiliation suggested darker motivations than martial arts mastery. Tommy's psychological profile emerged through his systematic approach. He studied each opponent beforehand, identifying their specific weaknesses and fighting in environments that favored his particular skill set. More disturbing was his apparent enjoyment of the psychological damage he inflicted, the way he lingered over each instructor's defeat, ensuring maximum embarrassment before their students and community. Each destroyed dojo left a wake of canceled memberships, shattered confidence, and financial ruin. Parents pulled their children from classes. Adults questioned their faith in their training. The martial arts community that had taken decades to build was crumbling in mere days. Thursday evening, Tommy's black Camaro pulled into the parking lot of Morrison's Karate Academy. Through the large windows, he could see Janet teaching her evening adult class. A diverse group including teenagers, middle-aged parents, and two elderly students working through basic blocking techniques with patient determination. Tommy positioned his phone and addressed his audience with barely concealed excitement. Time to show these karate practitioners what real martial arts looks like. The evening class at Morrison's Karate Academy represented everything Janet had worked to build. 12 dedicated students of varying ages and backgrounds united by their commitment to traditional martial arts values. The fluorescent lights cast sharp shadows across worn mats that had absorbed the sweat and dreams of countless students over 15 years. Tommy entered with his phone already live streaming, his presence immediately commanding attention as conversation stopped and students turned toward the unexpected visitor. Janet recognized the calculating look in his eyes. This wasn't a friendly visit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tommy announced to both the class and his online audience, "you've been wasting your time with angry dancing. Real fighting flows like water, not these rigid karate poses." Janet stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "This is a private class. If you'd like to schedule a discussion about martial arts philosophy." Philosophy? Tommy's laugh was sharp and mocking. "You teach children to punch air and call it self-defense. I'm here to show them what authentic combat looks like." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Janet's students, including teenagers Marcus Webb and Kelly Barnes who'd been training with her for 3 years, watched their instructor face this public humiliation with growing anxiety. Tommy's livestream comment section exploded with anticipation as viewers worldwide watched the confrontation unfold. "This isn't necessary," Janet said, but Tommy's response was swift and calculated. "Afraid to prove your teaching works? These people deserve to know if their instructor can actually fight." Backed into a corner, Janet accepted to protect her school's reputation and her students' faith in their training. The class formed a nervous circle as the two martial artists faced each other on the center mat. Tommy's attack was swift and brutal, exploiting every weakness in traditional karate methodology. Janet's linear techniques, perfect for teaching form and discipline, became predictable patterns that Tommy countered with circular movements and trapping techniques. Within 30 seconds, he had caught her extended punch, twisted her wrist with a sickening crack, and thrown her hard onto the mat. Janet's scream of pain mixed with the horrified gasps of her students as she clutched her obviously broken wrist. Tommy continued filming her agony, addressing her traumatized students directly. "Find a real martial arts teacher," he said coldly. already uploading the video with the title "Karate Teacher Learns Hard Truth About Real Fighting." Marcus and Kelly's tears reflected the shattering of more than just bone, their safe space, their confidence, their faith in the values they'd been taught. As the ambulance arrived and Janet was loaded onto a stretcher, the teenagers locked up the dojo, knowing their martial arts home might never recover. Tommy's view count climbed toward viral territory as he drove away, already planning his next target. 6 a.m. at Sedona Community College brought the peaceful quiet that Stephen Casey cherished most about his work. The hallways stretched empty before him as he pushed his mop bucket toward the computer lab, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost unconscious. Each step perfectly balanced, no wasted motion, as if he existed in a perpetual state of controlled readiness. Students and faculty who encountered the graying janitor saw only a reliable, unremarkable maintenance worker who'd been part of the campus landscape for 8 years. Professor Linda Hayes often mentioned how Stephen never missed a day, and somehow always knew exactly where to find anything on campus. Student Carrie Mitchell had once commented that he moved like a dancer or something. But such observations were fleeting. Stephen Casey was designed to be invisible. His morning routine was meditative in its precision, unlocking classrooms, emptying trash, setting up for the day's classes. Yet every movement revealed unconscious martial arts training to those who knew what to look for. The way he pivoted while mopping followed perfect footwork patterns. His posture remained centered despite repetitive tasks. His awareness of his surroundings was absolute. While cleaning the computer lab, Stephen noticed a student watching something on their phone. The screen showed Tommy's viral video of Janet's defeat, and Stephen paused his work to observe the entire encounter. His expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the mop handle tighter. The footage revealed everything Stephen needed to know about Tommy Chun: the calculated cruelty, the exploitation of a teacher's dedication to her students, the complete absence of martial arts philosophy or honor. This wasn't competition. It was predation. That evening, Stephen sat in his spartanly furnished apartment watching local news coverage of Tommy's martial arts tour. The reporter interviewed worried parents pulling their children from karate classes throughout the region. Janet Morrison remained hospitalized with mounting medical bills her insurance wouldn't fully cover. Stephen's apartment revealed subtle hints of his hidden past: a meditation corner with worn cushions, shelves lined with books on Eastern philosophy, and a locked closet containing items from his previous life. Everything was simple, functional, chosen for utility rather than displayed. As the news concluded, Stephen turned off the television and assumed meditation posture on his cushions. His breathing deepened, became controlled and purposeful. Behind closed eyelids, his mind processed everything he'd observed: Tommy's techniques, his psychological profile, the systematic nature of his attacks. When Stephen's eyes opened, they carried a new intensity. The decision had been made with the quiet finality of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. His community, the place he'd chosen as sanctuary from his legendary past, needed protection. And Stephen Casey, invisible janitor, was about to remember why he'd once been someone very different indeed. Dale Brennan's home office resembled a war room by Saturday morning. Police case files, newspaper clippings, and printouts covered every surface as the retired captain methodically investigated the man terrorizing his community's martial arts schools. His computer screen displayed Tommy's social media profile. While he worked his law enforcement contacts, 35 years of police work had taught Dale to trust his instincts, and everything about Bruce Lee Jr. screamed fraud. The investigation revealed disturbing truths. Tommy Chun of Los Angeles, no legitimate martial arts credentials from any recognized organization, criminal record including assault charges and identity fraud that Dale's contacts in California painted. A clearer picture: a failed stuntman with unpaid debts to several martial arts schools, a pattern of moving from town to town, leaving destruction behind. Court records showed previous identity theft charges and harassment complaints from legitimate martial artists whose names he'd stolen. Meanwhile, Janet returned home from the hospital, her wrist encased in a cast that would require months of healing. Medical bills she couldn't afford sat stacked on her kitchen table alongside refund requests from panicked parents. Half her students had already withdrawn, and her insurance covered barely 60% of the emergency room costs. The financial reality was crushing. Morrison's Karate Academy operated on thin margins even in good times. This incident might force closure permanently, destroying 15 years of dedicated work and leaving her students without their martial arts home. Tommy, unaware of Dale's investigation, continued building his online following while scouting targets for Phase 2 of his mission. His social media metrics showed exponential growth. The Janet Morrison video had exceeded 500,000 views, generating significant advertising revenue and attracting corporate attention. Dale printed. Tommy's criminal record, his jaw tight with anger at what this predator had done to Janet and the community. As he prepared to drive to Janet's house with his findings, his phone rang urgently. Frank Delacroix's voice carried unusual stress. Dale, you need to get down to the community center immediately. That fake Bruce Lee is here threatening the seniors. Dale grabbed the criminal records and rushed toward his car, knowing the situation had just escalated beyond property damage and medical bills. If Tommy was targeting elderly people, someone was going to get seriously hurt. Tommy paced beside his Camaro in the community center parking lot, Marcus Kellerman's voice crackling through the speakerphone with corporate authority. The Saturday afternoon sun beat down as Tommy updated his handler on the property acquisition project's progress. 3 schools closed, community center losing rental income, Tommy reported. The karate instructor's medical bills will force her closure. Within weeks, Kellerman's satisfaction was audible. Excellent. Remember, every business you destroy nets you $5,000 bonus, plus percentage of development profits. The community center property is our primary target. That lot's worth millions. The conversation revealed Tommy's true mission. Southwest Properties Incorporated wanted to build a massive strip mall complex, but needed the community center and surrounding martial arts schools at rock-bottom prices. Tommy's systematic reputation destruction was forcing desperate owners to sell rather than face financial ruin. The intimidation campaign's working perfectly, Kellerman continued. These small-town people can't handle sustained pressure. Once the community center's membership collapses, they'll be eager to sell. Tommy's sociopathic nature emerged clearly through the call. He genuinely enjoyed hurting people, but money provided the primary motivation, revenge against the martial arts community that had rejected him in California was just profitable bonus. What about law enforcement? Tommy asked. Local police can't touch you for legitimate martial arts demonstrations. Just avoid anything obviously criminal. The conspiracy extended beyond simple bullying into organized corporate warfare. Kellerman's development company had successfully destroyed dozens of small communities across the Southwest using identical tactics. Hire local troublemakers, destroy community institutions, acquire properties cheaply, build profitable developments. The seniors' Tai Chi class starts in 20 minutes, Tommy said, checking his watch. Perfect opportunity to show these old-timers that pretending to fight isn't real martial arts. Make it impressive for social media, Kellerman instructed. We need footage that discourages anyone from defending these places. Tommy ended the call and walked toward the community center, already filming himself for his audience. Through the windows, he could see 15 elderly people beginning their gentle, graceful movements under Frank Delacroix's patient instruction. His cruel smile reflected complete confidence as he pushed open the gymnasium door, unaware that Stephen Casey was mopping floors just around the corner, listening to every word of the phone conversation that had just sealed Tommy's fate. The Saturday afternoon senior Tai Chi class represented everything beautiful about community. 15 people, aged 65 to 85, moving together in gentle, flowing patterns that promoted health, meditation, and connection. Frank Delacroix, despite his 78 years and walking cane, led them with dignified patience while soft traditional music played from a portable speaker. Tommy's entrance shattered the peaceful atmosphere like a hammer through glass. His live stream was already running as he mocked their pretend fighting and called Tai Chi dancing for people too old to dance well. "Excuse me, young man," Frank said politely, his military bearing evident despite his age. "This is a private class focused on health and meditation, not combat. Perhaps you could health?" Tommy's laugh was sharp and cruel. "You're waving your hands in the air pretending to be warriors. Let me show you what real kung fu looks like." He demonstrated. flashy techniques while the seniors watched nervously, several instinctively moving closer together for protection. When 71-year-old Dorothy Hayes attempted to call security on her cell phone, Tommy blocked her path with aggressive posturing. "Nobody's calling anyone," he said, still filming. "These people need to learn respect for authentic martial arts." Frank stepped forward despite the walking cane he needed for his old military injury. Decades of leadership experience had taught him when to stand up for others, regardless of personal cost. His voice carried quiet authority that had once commanded soldiers in Korea. "Son, you need to leave these people alone and go find someone your own age to bother." Tommy's response was swift and vicious. He shoved Frank hard, sending the elderly veteran stumbling backward into a wooden bench. The impact against Frank's hip produced an audible crack, and the old soldier collapsed with a cry of pain that cut through every senior's heart. Teaching moment about respecting real martial arts, Tommy announced to his camera as Frank writhed on the floor, unable to rise. The other seniors cried out in alarm, Dorothy immediately dialing 911, while others knelt beside Frank with shaking hands. Tommy continued filming their distress, completely indifferent to the elderly man's obvious agony. As he prepared to leave, satisfied with another humiliating victory over vulnerable targets, Tommy found his exit blocked by a figure that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Stephen Casey stood holding his mop, but everything about his presence had transformed from invisible maintenance worker to something infinitely more dangerous. "I think you should apologize to these people and leave." The community center gymnasium fell silent except for Frank's labored breathing and Dorothy's whispered reassurances to the injured veteran. Stephen Casey stood between Tommy and the exit, no longer the invisible janitor, but transformed into something that radiated controlled menace. Tommy looked Stephen up and down, seeing only work clothes and graying hair. His livestream audience was already commenting excitedly about this unexpected development as he laughed dismissively. "What are you going to do about it, old man?" "Mop me to death." Stephen set down his cleaning equipment with deliberate care, each movement precise and purposeful. As he turned to face Tommy fully, his entire bearing shifted, spine straight, stance balanced, hands positioned with the unconscious precision of decades of training. "My name is Steven Seagal," he said quietly, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "And you've made a serious mistake coming to my town." The recognition hit Tommy like a physical blow. His confident smirk faltered as he realized he wasn't facing a maintenance worker but a legitimate martial arts legend whose aikido mastery was beyond question. The seniors watched in amazement as their humble janitor revealed himself as their protector. Tommy's first attack came fast, a flurry of his signature techniques designed to overwhelm through speed and aggression. Stephen barely seemed to move, redirecting each strike with minimal effort, using Tommy's momentum against him with textbook aikido principles. Within seconds, Tommy found himself thrown to the mat, confused and shaken. As he scrambled to his feet, Stephen remained centered and calm, hands ready but not aggressive. "This isn't over," Tommy snarled, backing toward the door while still filming. "I've got friends coming, and we're going to finish what you started." Stephen watched him retreat without pursuit, kneeling beside Frank as paramedics arrived. The elderly veteran looked into Stephen's eyes with recognition and respect. "I knew there was something special about you, son," Frank whispered. Dale Brennan burst through the doors as the ambulance loaded Frank, and Stephen quietly explained what had happened. Everything had changed now. The hidden protector had revealed himself, and Tommy's corporate conspiracy would soon discover they'd chosen the wrong community to terrorize. As Tommy's Camaro squealed out of the parking lot, Stephen helped Dorothy gather the scattered Tai Chi equipment, knowing that the real fight was just beginning. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive calm at the Sedona Community Center. Stephen arrived early for his shift, moving through familiar routines while processing the previous day's revelations. The gymnasium still bore scuff marks from his confrontation with Tommy, and several early arriving seniors approached him with gratitude mixed with curious questions. Dorothy Hayes spoke for the group, her voice trembling with emotion. "We can't thank you enough for what you did yesterday. Frank's going to recover fully, thanks to you." Stephen deflected personal questions with characteristic humility, assuring them only that Tommy wouldn't hurt anyone else in their community. His focus remained on the larger threat he knew was coming. Men like Tommy rarely worked alone, and yesterday's defeat would demand escalation. 60 miles away in Phoenix, Tommy was recruiting backup from his stuntman contacts. 3 MMA fighters, Rick Nash, Bobby Torres, and Jake Morrison, each desperate for quick cash and willing to bend rules for a $1,000 payday. Tommy studied Steven's revealed identity online, finding old footage and articles about the action star turned aikido master. The reality of his situation was sinking in. He'd challenged someone whose martial arts credentials were beyond question, whose decades of training had created a living legend. But Kellerman's development project couldn't afford failure, and Tommy's own reputation demanded he salvage this disaster. His social media strategy shifted accordingly. New posts challenged Steven to a formal rematch, claiming the janitor had gotten lucky with a sucker punch and that authentic kung fu would still prove superior to Hollywood aikido. His follower count continued climbing as the story gained national attention. By afternoon, Tommy's black Camaro returned to the community center, followed by a second vehicle carrying his hired muscle. The three fighters looked professional and dangerous, exactly what Tommy needed to restore his credibility and complete Kellerman's mission. They entered the gymnasium where Steven was setting up chairs for an afternoon meeting, their presence immediately commanding attention as word spread throughout the building. Tommy announced loudly that he'd brought real fighters to witness kung fu's superiority over aikido pretension. Steven looked at the four men calmly, removed his janitor's uniform to reveal simple workout clothes underneath, and stepped into the center of the gymnasium as spectators began gathering for what everyone knew would be the real test. The community center gymnasium filled rapidly as news of the confrontation spread through Sedona's tight-knit network. Janet arrived despite her cast, accompanied by Marcus and Kelly, who needed to see their martial arts world make sense again. Dale Brennan entered with Patricia and several concerned citizens, while other community members filtered in with the nervous energy of people witnessing something unprecedented. Steven stood alone in the center, facing Tommy and his three hired fighters with serene composure. The contrast was striking, for aggressive men radiating violent intent against one calm figure who seemed rooted to the earth itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tommy announced to both his livestream audience and the growing crowd, "prepare to witness authentic martial arts destroy Hollywood pretense." The fight began with Tommy directing his fighters to attack Steven from multiple angles, their coordination suggesting professional training and genuine combat experience. Steven's response was pure aikido mastery, redirecting aggression rather than meeting it head-on, using each attacker's momentum against them. Rick Nash's powerful strikes found only empty air as Steven moved with liquid precision, redirecting the force into throws that sent the striker stumbling into his teammates. Bobby Torres's grappling attempts became opportunities for Steven to demonstrate leverage principles that left the much younger man confused and off balance. Jake Morrison's mixed techniques proved ineffective against Steven's flowing responses that seemed to anticipate every attack before it fully developed. Throughout the exchanges, Steven maintained his teaching commentary, explaining aikido philosophy to the watching crowd. "True martial arts seeks harmony, not dominance," Steven said while effortlessly avoiding a coordinated rush. "Force meeting force creates only escalation and injury." His techniques showed precision and control. He could have seriously injured any of the fighters, but chose instead to neutralize their aggression through superior understanding of timing, distance, and leverage. Each demonstration built on the last, creating an educational experience rather than simple violence. Tommy grew increasingly frustrated as his plan backfired spectacularly. The crowd was clearly impressed with Steven's skill and restraint, while his hired fighters appeared increasingly reluctant to continue their futile assault. After 10 minutes of systematic neutralization, Tommy's three fighters were exhausted and demoralized while Steven showed no signs of strain. Recognizing the need for a different approach, Tommy signaled his men to back off and approached Steven directly. "This proves nothing," he declared. "You haven't faced authentic kung fu in single combat." Steven and Tommy faced each other in the gymnasium's center while the crowd formed a respectful circle around them. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation as two martial arts philosophies prepared to clash. Tommy's aggressive, ego-driven approach against Steven's centered, principle-based mastery. Tommy had abandoned his phone, focusing entirely on the fight that would determine his mission's success or failure. His stance carried desperate intensity, knowing that defeat here would destroy both his reputation and Kellerman's development scheme. Steven maintained his aikido posture, hands relaxed but ready, his entire being radiating the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades perfecting his art not for glory, but for understanding that Tommy's initial attack unleashed everything he possessed. Legitimate martial arts techniques mixed with dirty tactics learned from his stuntman background. His speed was impressive, his technique polished, his aggression absolute. But Steven's response revealed the vast gulf between competent fighting and true mastery. Each of Tommy's strikes was redirected with minimal effort, turned into opportunities for throws and joint manipulations that left the younger man increasingly frustrated. Steven moved throughout the gymnasium like water flowing around obstacles, using walls, chairs, even the basketball hoop as extensions of his defensive strategy. Aikido doesn't seek to destroy opponents, Steven explained during a brief pause. His breathing still controlled while Tommy gasped with exertion. It seeks to neutralize aggression and restore harmony. The philosophical lesson continued through physical demonstration. Tommy's impressive techniques were consistently turned against him through superior understanding of timing and leverage. His flashy combinations became predictable patterns that Steven countered with classical Aikido applications. The watching crowd observed a masterclass in martial arts principles as Steven showed how true skill wasn't about overpowering opponents, but understanding how to redirect their energy constructively. His decades of training were evident in every response. Not just technical mastery, but the character development that authentic martial arts was meant to create. Tommy's desperation grew with each failed attack. His technique remained sharp, but his mental state deteriorated as nothing he tried could penetrate Steven's defenses. The systematic neutralization of his every effort was psychologically devastating for someone whose identity depended on martial dominance. Finally, frustrated beyond endurance and recognizing that honorable combat wouldn't succeed, Tommy called for his backup fighters to rejoin the battle. Steven didn't protest as all four men surrounded him, understanding that Tommy had abandoned any pretense of authentic martial arts competition. The crowd murmured with concern as Steven settled into a deeper stance, preparing for the real challenge. Ahead, four opponents surrounded Steven as they coordinated their attack strategy, abandoning any pretense of fair play for the raw mathematics of overwhelming force. Tommy directed his fighters with desperate intensity, knowing this represented his last chance to salvage both his reputation and Kellerman's development project. The crowd watched nervously as Steven faced genuinely dangerous odds. Dale Brennan started forward instinctively, but Steven caught his eye and shook his head slightly. This was something that required resolution through martial arts principles, not outside interference. The coordinated assault began with professional timing, all four attackers moving simultaneously from different angles. Steven's response showcased advanced Aikido applications under extreme pressure, using the attacker's coordination against them by causing collisions and confusion as they interfered with each other's attacks. When Jake Morrison attempted to introduce a folding knife, Steven demonstrated weapon retention techniques that turned the blade into a liability for its wielder. Bobby Torres's grappling expertise became a disadvantage when Steven used him as a human shield against Rick Nash's strikes. Throughout the intense exchanges, Steven maintained his teaching commentary, explaining to the fascinated crowd how proper training and philosophy could overcome brute force and numerical superiority. His techniques became increasingly complex and impressive as the pressure mounted. Aikido was developed for battlefield conditions, Steven said while redirecting multiple simultaneous attacks. One warrior facing many opponents requires understanding of movement, timing, and the opponent's psychology. The hired fighters began respecting him even while continuing their assault, recognizing they faced someone whose skill transcended anything they'd previously encountered. Their attacks grew less coordinated as individual survival instincts overcame team tactics. Tommy's cowardice became evident as he directed others to take risks while positioning himself safely outside the primary engagement. His leadership of the attack revealed him as someone who preferred others to fight his battles when the outcome was uncertain. Despite Steven's remarkable skill, the prolonged 4-on-1 combat began taking its inevitable toll. Multiple opponents meant multiple angles of attack, and even perfect defense couldn't prevent every strike from connecting. Blood appeared on Steven's face as coordinated rushes finally found their mark. Tommy saw his opportunity and grabbed a metal folding chair, raising it over Steven's apparently dazed head. The crowd gasped in horror as Janet screamed a warning, but Steven appeared too stunned to defend himself. The chair crashed down with vicious intent, and Steven collapsed to the gymnasium floor, motionless as Tommy stood over him in apparent triumph. Steven lay motionless on the gymnasium floor as Tommy dropped the chair and raised his arms in victory, his chest heaving with exertion and savage satisfaction. The crowd stood frozen in stunned silence until Dorothy Hayes broke the spell, rushing forward to check on their fallen protector despite the potential danger. "Stay back," Tommy shouted, but the elderly woman ignored him, kneeling beside Steven with trembling hands. Other seniors followed her lead, their concern for Steven overriding their fear of Tommy and his crew. Dale Brennan took charge immediately, his police training asserting itself as he ordered Tommy's fighters to maintain distance while calling 911. However, as Dorothy placed her hand on Steven's chest, she noticed something that gave her hope. His breathing was controlled and steady, and his eyes, though closed, seemed alert beneath their lids. "He's conscious," she whispered to Dale, who nodded grimly while keeping watch on Tommy's crew. Janet approached Tommy directly, her broken wrist forgotten in her anger. "We know who you really are, Tommy Chin. We know about your criminal record and your assault charges in California." Tommy's triumphant expression faltered as Dale's investigation was revealed publicly. The community had been gathering intelligence while he'd been focused on his performances, and now his carefully constructed identity was crumbling before his livestream audience. Marcus and Kelly arrived with Professor Hayes and other faculty members who testified to Steven's character and years of faithful service. The community rallied around their protector with growing vocal support, calling friends and family to spread word about what was happening. Tommy's hired fighters, hearing about police involvement and criminal investigations, began exchanging nervous glances. Their $1,000 payday was looking less attractive as the situation spiraled beyond simple assault into conspiracy and fraud charges. Sirens approached in the distance as Tommy realized his position had become precarious. The community's unity was stronger than he'd calculated, and Steven's reputation provided credibility that his own manufactured persona couldn't match. One final challenge, Tommy announced desperately. "Tomorrow evening, high school gymnasium. Winner take all. If I win, this fraud admits aikido is inferior to authentic kung fu. If he wins, I leave town forever." Steven's eyes opened with laser focus as he accepted the challenge from his position on the floor. Tommy and his crew left quickly as police arrived, but everyone understood this was merely moving to a bigger stage. Monday morning found Tommy in a Phoenix hotel room, facing Marcus Kellerman's fury across blueprints of Sedona High School's gymnasium. The corporate executive's expensive suit couldn't hide his rage at how a simple intimidation job had become a public spectacle threatening their entire operation. "You've turned this into a media circus," Kellerman snarled. "Social media's calling it the fight of the century. We needed quiet destruction, not worldwide attention." But Kellerman's business instincts recognized opportunity within crisis. If Steven Seagal was eliminated publicly and decisively, it would send a message that would discourage resistance in future operations while providing spectacular marketing for Tommy's martial arts brand. "I'm bringing additional resources," Kellerman continued, spreading out tactical equipment catalogs. 2 more professional fighters, concealed weapons, and technical equipment to rig the gymnasium in your favor. The plan was ruthless in its simplicity, turned the fair fight into an orchestrated ambush that would permanently eliminate Steven while maintaining plausible deniability. The high school setting would provide multiple tactical advantages and enough space for coordinated attacks. In Sedona, Steven spent Monday in meditation and light training, preparing both mentally and physically for what he knew would be far more than Tommy's simple challenge. His years in Hollywood had taught him about staged events and corporate manipulation. This fight would involve layers of deception, Dale used his law enforcement contacts to investigate Southwest Properties, Inc., uncovering the full scope of their land acquisition scheme. The conspiracy extended to dozens of communities across the Southwest, with documented patterns of intimidation, fraud, and corporate theft disguised as legitimate development. Janet worked with her students and other local martial artists to organize community support for Steven. They created documentation plans to ensure fair play and evidence gathering, understanding that this fight represented more than personal combat. It was about community survival against corporate predation. Monday evening at Sedona High School brought unprecedented crowds. Local news crews transformed the event into a media spectacle as the gymnasium filled with over 300 spectators drawn by social media buzz and community solidarity. Steven entered quietly through a side door, wearing simple GI pants and a black t-shirt, moving with the centered confidence of someone prepared for anything. Tommy arrived with fanfare, accompanied by his expanded crew and professional video equipment as they met at center court. Tommy whispered that this wouldn't be the fair fight it appeared. Steven nodded calmly. He'd expected nothing else from a corporate conspiracy designed to destroy everything he'd grown to love about his chosen community. Sedona High School's gymnasium buzzed with energy as over 300 spectators filled the bleachers. Local athletic commission referees explained the rules while news crews positioned cameras for what had become a regional media event. Everything appeared legitimate and fair, but Steven's trained awareness detected subtle warning signs throughout. The venue. Tommy's crew was positioned too strategically around the exits. Unusual technical equipment sat near the lighting controls. Most telling was Tommy's overconfident demeanor. He carried himself like someone who knew the outcome was predetermined. The opening minutes followed standard martial arts demonstration protocols. Both men tested each other's abilities in what appeared to be honorable single combat, their techniques drawing appreciative murmurs from spectators who recognized genuine skill on display. Steven's aikido principles flowed beautifully against Tommy's kung fu combinations, each exchange building tension as the crowd witnessed two legitimate fighting systems in direct competition. Tommy's speed and technique were impressive, but Steven's mastery of timing and distance kept him safely ahead. After 5 minutes of escalating combat, Tommy signaled his hidden crew. The fair challenge transformed instantly into coordinated ambush as 6 additional fighters emerged from strategic positions throughout the crowd, surrounding Steven with professional precision. The gymnasium lights dimmed suddenly as Kellerman's technical crew activated their equipment, creating confusion and limiting visibility for both spectators and potential recording devices. Hidden weapons appeared: extendable batons, brass knuckles, weighted gloves that transformed strikes from painful to potentially lethal. Steven found himself facing not just overwhelming numerical odds, but a deliberately orchestrated assassination attempt disguised as a martial arts demonstration. The referees attempted to stop the fight, but were threatened into backing off by Tommy's crew members positioned throughout the crowd. This wasn't about proving martial arts superiority. It was about eliminating Steven permanently while making it appear like an accident during legitimate combat. The corporate conspiracy had revealed its true nature, abandoning any pretense of fair play for raw elimination of their primary obstacle. Steven settled into a deeper aikido stance as the 8 attackers closed in, understanding that his community's survival depended on what happened in the next few minutes. The real battle for Sedona was about to begin, and Steven prepared to demonstrate why legends never truly fade when justice demands their return. 8 men surrounded Steven as the gymnasium erupted into chaos, spectators shouting protests while Tommy's planted crew members blocked intervention attempts. The dimmed lighting created a nightmarish atmosphere as Steven faced the most dangerous situation of his long career. Despite his legendary skills, the mathematics of combat were unforgiving. Multiple attackers with weapons and coordination created angles of attack that even perfect aikido couldn't completely neutralize. Steven's techniques remained flawless, but the sheer volume of simultaneous threats began overwhelming his defenses that a weighted baton connected with his ribs. Brass knuckles grazed his temple. The coordinated assault was professionally executed, designed to incapacitate rather than simply defeat. Steven staggered as multiple impacts found their mark, blood streaming down his face. Dale Brennan fought desperately to reach his friend, but was restrained by more hidden crew members positioned throughout the crowd. Janet screamed warnings while Marcus and Kelly watched in horror as their community's protector appeared to be systematically destroyed. Tommy seized his moment, grabbing a metal folding chair and raising it over Steven's head as the crowd's protests reached fever pitch. This was the killing blow that would end both Steven's interference and serve as brutal warning to anyone else considering resistance. This is what happens when Hollywood meets authentic martial arts. Tommy shouted to his live stream audience, bringing the chair down with vicious intent. The impact seemed to connect solidly, and Steven collapsed completely to the basketball court, lying motionless as Tommy stood over him in apparent triumph. The gymnasium fell silent except for the horrified gasps of spectators who believed they'd just witnessed their protector's destruction. Tommy began his victory celebration, filming himself while declaring Kung Fu's absolute superiority over all other martial arts. His crew maintained their positions, preventing anyone from reaching Steven's motionless form, while Kellerman watched from the stands with cold satisfaction. But Frank Delacroix, observing from his wheelchair near the court, noticed something others missed. Steven's breathing remained controlled despite his apparent unconsciousness, and subtle muscle tension suggested someone maintaining awareness rather than genuine injury. The old veteran's military experience recognized tactical deception when he saw it. Steven wasn't defeated, he was gathering intelligence and preparing for counterattack. The question was whether his community would survive long enough for their protector to reveal his final gambit. As Tommy continued his celebration, completely unaware that his apparent victory was about to become his ultimate downfall. Tommy stood over Steven's motionless form, savoring what he believed was complete victory, while his livestream audience witnessed the systematic destruction of a martial arts legend. The gymnasium's chaos provided perfect cover as Kellerman's crew maintained control and prevented any interference with their orchestrated triumph. But Steven's apparent defeat was the culmination of decades of mental discipline and tactical training. Using an advanced meditation technique learned from his aikido masters, he had absorbed the chair strike while maintaining consciousness and awareness. Through barely opened eyes, he cataloged every opponent's position and assessed their weapons. In coordination, Frank Delacroix recognized the signs from his military experience, quietly organizing veterans and community supporters in the bleachers. The old soldiers' whispered instructions spread through the crowd. When Steven made his move, they needed to be ready to help however possible. Tommy turned to address his audience with final commentary about Kung Fu's superiority. Steven's transformation began. His breathing shifted from shallow to controlled, his muscles coiled with stored energy, and his awareness sharpened to laser focus. In one explosive motion that caught everyone by surprise, Steven rose from the gymnasium floor with movements faster and more precise than anything he'd demonstrated before. The apparent defeat had been strategic positioning, allowing him to study every weakness in his opponent's formation. The gymnasium fell dead silent as Steven stood in the center of the court, blood on his face, but his presence absolutely commanding. Tommy spun around to find himself face to face with a very conscious, very dangerous Aikido master whose eyes blazed with controlled fury. "Now it's my turn," Steven said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence with deadly promise. Tommy's confident smirk died as he realized his greatest mistake, assuming that legendary warriors could be defeated by simple treachery. Steven's apparent vulnerability had been calculated deception, and now 8 attackers found themselves facing someone whose restraint had been removed by their own brutality. The corporate conspiracy had awakened something they couldn't understand or control. Steven Seagal was no longer the humble janitor or even the defensive teacher. He was the legendary warrior his reputation had always suggested, and justice was about to be served with devastating precision. The real fight was finally beginning. And Tommy's crew was about to discover why some legends are built on truth rather than marketing. Steven moved through the gymnasium like liquid death, his Aikido transformed into something more lethal than anything Tommy's crew had ever encountered. The techniques remained rooted in classical principles, but now they were applied with surgical precision designed to systematically dismantle coordinated threats. The basketball court became Steven's dojo as he used every line, circle, and surface as extensions of his defensive strategy. Tommy's fighters discovered that their previous success had been due entirely to Steven's restraint. Without that limitation, they faced someone whose martial mastery transcended their understanding. Rick Nash's powerful strikes were redirected. With devastating efficiency, his own force turned against him through leverage applications that sent him crashing into the bleachers. Bobby Torres found his grappling expertise useless against someone who understood human anatomy and joint manipulation at a level that made resistance futile. Steven's weapon disarmament techniques turned every baton and pair of brass knuckles into liabilities for their wielders. His understanding of momentum and timing created cascade effects where each neutralized attacker became an obstacle for his remaining teammates. "This is what authentic martial arts looks like," Steven said, calmly while deflecting multiple simultaneous attacks. Not dominance through aggression, but justice through superior understanding. His commentary continued the educational aspect that had defined all his previous demonstrations, but now the lessons were delivered through techniques that left no doubt about their effectiveness. Each application showed precision that could incapacitate without permanent damage. Steven remained controlled even in his fury. Jake Morrison attempted to flee toward the exits, but found his path blocked by community members who had organized under Frank Delacroix's quiet leadership. The gymnasium had become a trap for the trappers, with Steven's supporters ensuring that justice would be complete. Tommy watched in growing horror as his professionally trained fighters were systematically dismantled by someone whose skill made their experience look amateur. The corporate conspiracy's ultimate weapon, overwhelming force and coordination, was being turned into demonstration of why authentic mastery always defeats mere technique. Within minutes, 5 of Tommy's crew lay groaning on the gymnasium floor with various joint locks and impact injuries that would heal but wouldn't soon be forgotten. Steven faced Tommy and Rick Nash, allowing the last fighter to flee while focusing entirely on the man who had terrorized his community. The crowd watched in amazement as their protector prepared for the final confrontation with surgical calm and absolute confidence. Tommy faced Steven alone on the basketball court, his backup crew defeated and scattered while 300 witnesses watched the final confrontation between authentic martial arts and corporate-sponsored fraud. The folding chair lay forgotten beside them as both men prepared for what everyone understood would be the decisive moment. Rick Nash had fled through the exits, abandoning his employer rather than face further demonstration of Steven's capabilities. Tommy gripped a weighted baton with white knuckles, his earlier confidence completely shattered by the systematic destruction of his supposedly overwhelming advantages. Steven's approach was patient and methodical, allowing Tommy multiple opportunities to surrender honorably while demonstrating advanced weapon retention techniques. The baton became another tool in Steven's arsenal as he showed how proper training could turn any object into either protection or liability, depending on the wielder's skill level. "This is the fundamental lesson," Steven explained to the watching crowd while effortlessly avoiding Tommy's desperate swings. "Martial arts isn't about hurting others. It's about understanding how to neutralize aggression and restore balance." Each of Tommy's attacks was redirected with increasing precision. His own force turned against him through applications of leverage and timing that left him increasingly frustrated and exhausted. The physical demonstration became a masterclass in both technique and philosophy. Tommy's complete psychological breakdown revealed the hollow foundation of his martial arts persona. Without overwhelming advantages and dirty tactics, he was simply a competent fighter facing someone whose decades of authentic training had created genuine mastery. "You had natural talent," Steven observed sadly while neutralizing another desperate attack. "With proper guidance and authentic training, you could have become someone who protected others instead of preying on them." The philosophical lesson continued through physical dominance, showing the difference between someone who learned techniques for personal gain versus someone who understood martial arts as character development. Tommy's flashy combinations proved useless against principles that had been refined through centuries of authentic practice. Finally, completely defeated both physically and psychologically, Tommy dropped to his knees and begged Steven to stop. The weighted baton fell from nerveless fingers as his spirit broke under the relentless demonstration of what real martial arts mastery represented. Steven stood over him without cruelty, offering one final choice: leave Sedona forever and never. Return, or face the legal consequences of assault, fraud, and conspiracy charges that Dale's investigation had uncovered. Tommy chose exile, crawling toward the exit while his own equipment recorded his complete humiliation for posterity. Tommy crawled toward the gymnasium exit as his defeated crew limped behind him, their retreat recorded by the same equipment they'd brought to document Steven's destruction. The crowd watched in silence as the corporate conspiracy's local enforcement collapsed completely. Dale Brennan stepped forward with backup officers and arrest warrants for conspiracy, assault, fraud, and attempted extortion. However, the legal justice was secondary to what Steven revealed next: the complete exposure of Southwest Properties' development scheme to the assembled crowd. Using evidence Dale had gathered over the previous week, Steven explained how Tommy's attacks were part of coordinated corporate warfare designed to destroy local businesses for cheap property acquisition. The martial arts destruction was economic terrorism disguised as personal challenges. This wasn't about proving kung fu's superiority. Steven addressed the crowd directly. This was about destroying your community's institutions so they could be bought for pennies on the dollar and replaced with strip malls. The revelation transformed the crowd's understanding from personal combat to community survival. Their anger shifted from Tommy individually to the larger corporate threat that saw small towns as obstacles to profit rather than homes worth preserving. Steven announced that his invisible position as janitor had allowed him to gather intelligence on the conspiracy for weeks, protecting his community long before Tommy's challenge forced him into the open. His years of quiet service had been active guardianship all along. The AS police loaded Tommy and his remaining crew into patrol cars. Marcus Kellerman arrived with legal papers and Phoenix police backup, attempting emergency seizure of community center property under civil forfeiture laws related to the criminal conspiracy that had occurred there. But Steven was prepared for this escalation as well. His decades in Hollywood had taught him about legal maneuvering and corporate manipulation. He produced professionally recorded evidence of Kellerman's phone calls planning the entire scheme, documenting the conspiracy from its corporate source. Dale's contacts confirmed the Phoenix officers were acting outside their jurisdiction and that Kellerman's legal documents were fraudulent. The community rallied around Steven as he systematically dismantled Kellerman's legal authority while demonstrating that the real criminal conspiracy originated from Southwest Properties. The corporate executive found himself alone and exposed, his backup withdrawn, and his fraudulent paperwork useless against Steven's thorough preparation. The man who had orchestrated the destruction of dozens of communities finally faced someone who understood both physical combat and legal warfare. Steven approached Kellerman with the same calm intensity he'd shown Tommy, but now the threat was financial and legal rather than physical. Kellerman stood isolated near the gymnasium exit, his expensive suit and corporate arrogance suddenly powerless against the unified community he'd tried to destroy. His legal team and police backup had abandoned him as Steven approached with Dale, Janet, Frank in his wheelchair, and dozens of community members forming a determined semicircle. This final confrontation was entirely verbal and legal, showcasing Steven's complete skill set beyond martial arts mastery. His years in Hollywood had taught him about contracts, media manipulation, and corporate corruption, knowledge he'd used to gather ironclad evidence against Southwest Properties. "You have two choices," Steven said calmly, presenting Kellerman with legal documents. "Face federal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering, or sign this agreement dissolving all claims to Sedona Properties and paying full restitution to damaged businesses." The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded phone calls between Kellerman and Tommy, financial documents showing the systematic property acquisition scheme, testimony from Tommy who had agreed to cooperate for a lighter sentence, and documentation of identical operations in dozens of other communities. Kellerman's corporate lawyers had fled when the scope of federal charges became clear. RICO violations, interstate conspiracy, fraud across multiple jurisdictions. The legal exposure was catastrophic for both him personally and Southwest Properties. As a company, "This is extortion," Kellerman protested weakly. "This is justice," Frank Delacroix replied from his wheelchair, his military bearing lending authority despite his age. You declared war on our community. Now you pay the price. Dales. Federal contacts had already initiated investigations based on Steven's evidence. Other communities across the Southwest were coming forward with similar complaints, creating a class action scenario that threatened to destroy Kellerman's entire operation. Steven's victory was complete. Not just physical dominance over Tommy, but intellectual and legal superiority over the corporate mastermind who had orchestrated everything. His protection of the community extended beyond martial arts to understanding and defeating the systems that threatened ordinary people's homes and livelihoods. Recognizing that fighting would only worsen his legal exposure, Kellerman signed the settlement documents with shaking hands. Southwest Properties would pay millions in restitution while facing federal prosecution for their conspiracy across multiple states. A.S. Kellerman's car disappeared into the night. His development scheme collapsed, and his company facing federal investigation. The community realized they were truly safe for the first time in months. Wednesday morning, 1 week after the gymnasium confrontation, brought a new atmosphere to the Sedona Community Center. Steven arrived for his regular shift to find the building transformed. Seniors greeted him with respect and gratitude, while the Tai Chi class had resumed with record attendance under Frank's recovering leadership. The settlement money from Southwest Properties had created unprecedented opportunities for community growth. The community center received funding for facility updates and program expansion, while local martial arts schools that had closed during Tommy's rampage were able to reopen with new equipment and comprehensive insurance coverage to Janet's medical. Bills were paid in full through the restitution fund, and Morrison's Karate Academy received enough funding to relocate into a larger space within the community center complex. Her dojo and Steven's aikido program would complement each other, showing how different martial arts traditions could strengthen rather than compete with one another. Steven officially accepted the position of head of security and martial arts coordinator while maintaining his janitorial duties, work he genuinely enjoyed for its meditative qualities and connection to authentic service. His integration of both roles demonstrated that true leadership came through service, not status. Local news coverage of the corporate conspiracy had triggered state and federal investigations of similar schemes throughout the Southwest. Steven served as a key witness, helping other communities recognize and resist corporate intimidation tactics that preyed on small towns' vulnerabilities. The story resonated nationally as an example of community solidarity defeating corporate predation, with Steven's role highlighting how authentic strength protected others rather than dominating them. His reluctant celebrity status was managed carefully to support community values rather than personal fame. That evening, Steven led his first official aikido class in the community center gymnasium where he had once faced Tommy's ambush. The class included Janet with her healing wrist, several of her former students, multiple seniors from the Tai Chi group, Dale Brennan, and even former critics who now understood what real martial arts represented. As Steven began teaching fundamental aikido principles, harmony, redirection of aggression, and protection of others, the camera pulled back to show a community truly united for the first time. The gymnasium that had witnessed corporate conspiracy and violent confrontation was now filled with people learning how to build strength through service to others. 3 months later, the community center's martial arts program had expanded into a comprehensive network that served all ages and interests. Steven's aikido classes complemented Janet's reopened karate school, while Frank's Tai Chi group flourished with new members seeking the gentle strength they'd witnessed during the crisis. Steven's teaching philosophy emphasized character development over competition, attracting students who might never have considered martial arts before the community's transformation. His classes included elderly people seeking balance and flexibility, middle-aged adults learning practical self-defense, teenagers building confidence and discipline, and even former bullies learning to channel aggression constructively. Marcus Webb and Kelly Barnes had become Steven's assistant instructors, helping bridge the gap between karate and aikido techniques while embodying the positive youth development that authentic martial arts training created. Their growth from traumatized students to confident teachers demonstrated the healing power of authentic instruction. The success of Sedona's martial arts community inspired similar programs in neighboring towns. with Steven consulting on establishing ethical training standards and community-focused curricula. His influence extended beyond technique to encompass philosophy, leadership, and service-oriented approaches to strength. Real martial arts builds communities, not just individual fighters, Steven explained during a regional martial arts conference. When we teach people to protect others rather than dominate them, we create networks of mutual support that strengthen entire societies. The festival atmosphere at these events celebrated not just physical techniques, but the philosophy of using strength to serve others. Families, seniors, young people, and martial artists from traditional and modern backgrounds found common ground in principles that transcended style or system. Media coverage focused on Sedona as a model for how small communities could preserve traditional values while adapting to contemporary challenges. Steven's transformation from hidden celebrity to community leader illustrated how authentic leadership emerged through service rather than self-promotion. After his evening class, Steven sat in meditation in the empty gymnasium, reflecting on how his life had found deeper meaning in this small desert community than anything he'd achieved during his Hollywood career. Frank joined him, moving steadily without assistance after months of consistent Tai Chi practice. They sat together in comfortable silence, two warriors from different eras who understood that true victory wasn't defeating enemies but building something worth protecting. The community they'd fought to preserve was now stronger than ever, rooted in principles that would outlast any individual threat. 1 year later, the Sedona Community Center hosted its first annual martial arts and philosophy festival, drawing visitors from across the Southwest to celebrate the integration of physical training with character development. Steven observed from the sidelines as his students demonstrated aikido principles alongside Janet's karate pupils, Frank's expanding Tai Chi group, and new programs in judo, kendo, and capoeira. The festival represented everything the community had learned about authentic strength, not dominance over others, but the power to lift everyone higher. Families participated together, seniors shared wisdom with young people, and martial artists from different traditions found unity in common values of service and protection. Steven's keynote speech drew from Tommy and Kellerman's defeat without naming them, using their story as a teaching moment about how authentic training prepared people to face any threat, physical, emotional, or spiritual. The audience understood they were witnessing something rare, a community that had faced corporate predation and emerged stronger through unity and traditional values. Real martial arts isn't about proving you're better than others, Steven told the assembled crowd. It's about becoming better than you were yesterday and using that growth to help others find their own strength. The festival included workshops on conflict resolution, leadership through service, and building community resilience against external threats. Media coverage emphasized Sedona's transformation from a targeted community into a model for others facing similar challenges. As evening approached and the last visitors departed, Steven performed his final janitorial duties, not from obligation, but from choice to serve his community in every way possible. The gymnasium floor where he had once faced Tommy's ambush now reflected the warm lights of celebration and learning that a young girl approached as Steven finished mopping, asking if she could start Aikido lessons next week. He knelt to her level, seeing in her curious eyes the same potential he'd nurtured in dozens of students over the past year. Of course, he said with a gentle smile. The first lesson is always the most important, learning that real strength comes from helping others become strong. The camera pulled back through the community center windows to show Sedona at sunset, a small town that had learned the difference between predators and protectors. Here, legendary heroes could still be found mopping floors and teaching children, where the greatest victories happen not in spotlight moments, but in quiet daily choices to serve something greater than yourself. In a world of corporate conspiracies and manufactured conflicts, one community had discovered that authentic strength, traditional values, and mutual protection could still triumph over greed and manipulation, as long as good people were willing to stand together when justice demanded their courage. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.